tanks and aircraft. China is also working to provide Russia with improved satellite capability and imagery. All of this enables Moscow to inflict more death and destruction on Ukraine, bolster Russia's defense industrial base, and evade the impact of sanctions and exports controls. Publicly, President Xi has tried to create the impression that he is taking a backseat in the conflict in Ukraine, to avoid sanctions and to keep trade flowing. But the reality is that China is fueling the largest armed conflict in Europe since World War II. And at the same time, it wants to maintain good relations with the West. Well, Beijing cannot have it both ways. At some point, and unless China changes course, allies need to impose a cost. Russia is receiving support from others too. North Korea has delivered over 1 million rounds of artillery shells, and Iran has delivered thousands of deadly Shahed drones. We are deeply concerned that in exchange, Pyongyang and Tehran could receive Russian technology and supplies to help them advance their missile and nuclear programs. The growing alignment between Russia and its authoritarian friends in Asia makes it even more important that we work closely with our friends in the Indo-Pacific. I have therefore invited the leaders, the heads of state and government of Australia, Japan, New Zealand and the Republic of Korea to the summit in Washington next month. Together, we can uphold the international rules-based order and protect our shared values. So, ladies and gentlemen, for 75 years, NATO allies has kept us safe, just as Prime Minister Justin Trudeau knew it would. It saw us through the Cold War and the breakup of the Soviet Union, ended ethnic wars in the Balkans, and helped us fight terrorism in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks and the rise of ISIS. And NATO keeps us safe today as we prepare for a more dangerous world. Thanks to the collective strength of NATO, we can stand up to authoritarian powers like Russia and China and make sure that freedom and democracy prevail in Ukraine. And it's through NATO that we will continue to protect our values, our nations, and our 1 billion people. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Secretary General. I'm pleased to invite Lisa Laflamme up to the stage now. We have, yes, please, round of applause. And absolutely the forefront of Canadian journalism for over 35 years. Everybody knows her and respects her. Lisa, thank you so much. We're just going to get a lavalier on the Secretary General. But we have 10 minutes for a fireside chat, I'm happy to say, and then 10 minutes for questions from the floor. There are 2 mics on either side, so start thinking of your question. Lisa.
Thank you, Robert. It's always nice to be in Ottawa. Can you hear me? Working? Check, check, check. Always great to be in Ottawa, especially in a heat wave. I always say this is the one time every man knows what it's like to go through menopause. And you were raised by a feminist, so you probably know. It's really wonderful to have this opportunity to meet with you, to speak with you today on such a pivotal time for NATO. And there's, thank you so much. There's a lot of ground to cover. But I want to start at the end, if I can, your actual leadership. And the fact that your mandate has been extended 4 times, is it 5 times? It's sort of morphing into a Rolling Stones farewell tour. Is this really it for you in October? Or because already so many people in the room have been saying they don't want to see you leave?
I promise to answer that question in a moment, but first, I will not, what should I say, take over the role of the organizers, but there are many free seats over here for some important people, and they have not come, so you can go and sit there.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah, I mean it.
See,
Those
what
people,
a leader, honestly.
Seriously, you have too
can't
many
leave.
shy people over there, so there are seats here. That's the first thing. Then, I'm raised by a feminist, but not only a feminist. My mother was called, her name was Karin Heiberg, or Karin Stoltenberg later. She lived in Montreal for many years, studied at McGill, and actually married a Canadian.
Wow.
But that's not my father. So.
But isn't that how you ended up meeting Leonard Cohen? Didn't I read that somewhere?
As now we are far off the item of today, but but Leonard was together with a Norwegian woman, Marianne.
We know the song.
Ilen, and they lived at the island down in Greece. But before that, Marianne and my mother Karin, they were friends here in Canada.
Oh.
And also, the man that my mother married was a friend of Leonard Cohen, and I don't know so much more, but.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say this makes you an honorary Canadian. Definitely.
But I can say one more thing. And Leonard came to Oslo. Leonard Cohen came to Oslo. Let's say I was Prime Minister. I guess it was 2010 or something, and gave a big concert. And I was there together with Karin, my mother, and Marianne Ilen.
Wow.
And that was really touching. That was just a few years before he passed away. So there is a relationship between Canada and Norway that goes through Leonard Cohen.
That is beautiful.
Yeah. Okay, but then
now let's get serious, folks.
So then, it has been a great privilege to serve as Secretary General of NATO, especially in this very pivotal and important, critical years for NATO. And it has been an honor to work with Canada and all the NATO allies. But everything has to end, and my tenure ends on the 1st of October. And I am stepping down knowing that the alliance is now very, very close to decide on my successor. And that will also... the candidate out there is Mark Rutte. He is a great man. He has been Prime Minister for many years. He strongly believes in the transatlantic bond. He's a friend and colleague, NATO will be in very good hands, given that Mark Rutte is going to be the next Secretary General.
What would your best piece of advice to him be?
First of all, I'm very afraid of these kind of outgoing people giving advice to those who are coming in, because they have to meet and to face the challenges in their way, and I'm absolutely certain that he will be able to do so. And then I have great respect for that the final decision has not been taken. It will be taken by allies, not by me. But the most important challenge, task for any Secretary General of NATO is to ensure that we remain together. Because, you know, if you look at NATO allies, we are very different. We are different countries from both sides of the Atlantic, and we are Christian Democrats and conservatives and social democrats and liberals and many different things. And we disagree, and we have different views on the climate change and abortion and a lot of things. But the strength of NATO is that we have always been able to unite around the core task, and that is that we protect each other, that we stand together, because we know that we are democracies. We respect the fact that we disagree, that we have elections, that we elect different political leaders, and that we have a free and independent press, and that people can have different views. That's what we are protecting. And as long as we agree on that core task, then we will prevail. Because North America and Europe together, we are 50% of the world's economic might and 50% of the world's military might. So we are by far the strongest power in the world. So we just have to stand together, protect against those authoritarian powers out there, and everything will be fine.
And I want to get into the authoritarian powers and the new alliances, the increased alliances. But and you've mentioned so much significant progress in Belgium last week, this week in Washington. But I actually want to zero in on some of your very stark words and warnings, if you will, about Russia's heightened aggression campaign, whether it's against NATO member states. So, you know, hybrid warfare, these sorts of things. You're here with a Canadian audience on Canadian soil. What is the risk you refer to that Canadians should be aware of?
We should be aware of, all of us, that one thing is a full-fledged armed military attack. We know that how that looks like, and we know how to respond. And we have plans, we have forces, and the purpose of NATO is actually then not to fight the war, but to prevent the war, to prevent the military attack. And as long as we are strong, as long as we are united, there will be no military attack on any NATO allied country, because we are one for all for one, and then we succeed in preventing a military attack. As we have done for 75 years, and I'm absolutely certain that NATO will be able to do that also in the future. The challenge is that we are threatened by something which is not a full-fledged military attack, which is this cyber hybrid, this below Article 5, as is often referred to, threats. And that is everything from meddling in our political processes, undermining the trust in our political institutions, disinformation, cyber attacks. We have seen across Europe now many sabotage actions against critical infrastructure and so on. So what we have to do is, as an alliance, to increase awareness, to be aware that these are real threats. We need to exchange intelligence. We have seen several examples now in Europe where they have made arrests have been made based on intelligence shared by other NATO allies, prevented sabotage and action against critical infrastructure and other targets in Europe. It's about protecting critical infrastructure, protecting cyber networks, and perhaps most importantly, to counter disinformation. And to counter disinformation is partly a task of governments, NATO, to put out the fact, to ensure that facts and correct information is available. But I believe that at the end of the day, the most important way to counter disinformation is to have a free and independent press, with independent journalists who are asking the different questions and checking their sources. That is quite sometimes a bit annoying for people like me, but actually I'm more in favor of free and independent press now than ever before, because I see the danger of not having it. So to ensure we have free and independent press is perhaps the best way to make us more resilient against disinformation.
And certainly we all know that Vladimir Putin is trying to short circuit the system by overloading it with lies. And we all watched, I'm sure, with great interest, his red carpet welcome in Pyongyang with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. They have now signed what is being referred to as pledging a mutual support against aggression. When you heard that today, can you translate for us what we need to be aware of?
We need to be aware of that authoritarian powers are aligning more and more, and they are supporting each other in a way we haven't seen before. Until recently, Russia at least tried to distance themselves a bit from North Korea, and they supported some of the UN security resolutions, putting sanctions and putting, as I say, obstacles for North Korea to develop nuclear weapons and missile programs. But they're now walking away from that. Just the fact that he went to North Korea, that he signed and agreed this pact of mutual defense, demonstrates how they support and help each other. We see that also, of course, in the war in Ukraine. North Korea has provided enormous amount of ammunition. We see how they're loading on containers with ammunition on trains in North Korea, and they go all the way across the border between North Korea and Russia. It's a small border by the Pacific coast. And the trains go all the way to the front line, and they unload, and this ammunition goes straight to the front, attacking also Ukrainians. So of course, in return, Russia is giving something to North Korea. And we are very deeply concerned about the possibility of also Russia now providing support for their nuclear and missile programs. So again, the answer is that when they are more and more aligned, authoritarian regimes like North Korea, China, Iran, Russia, then it's even more important that we are aligned as countries believing in freedom and democracy. So NATO is in that way even more important now than before.
You said just in your early remarks that China can't have it both ways, but it does.
Yeah.
It has it both ways.
Yeah.
So what is the impact on NATO, this new invigorated relationship between China and Russia? China, who is clearly unafraid of very publicly supporting Russia.
No, it is a dilemma because China is an important country in the world because of their size, their economy. We have to engage to work with China on issues like climate change and other issues. At the same time, we see how China is supporting Russia. China is the main supporter of the Russian war efforts in Ukraine, propping up their war economy and providing all the technology they need to build the most advanced weapons. Some allies have imposed some sanctions, United States. Other allies are of course much more hesitant, but this is an issue which has to be addressed and discussed because it cannot continue as now, where China has a kind of normal relationship and at the same time is responsible for the biggest security challenge we have seen, at least in Europe, since the Second World War. So just to put that issue on the agenda, I think is the first step. Then when it comes to NATO and China, I think it's important also to realize that NATO has come a long way. The first time we mentioned China in an agreed, negotiated policy document in NATO was in 2019. Because until then, NATO was about Russia or the Soviet Union and Russia. And China was, in a way, for the United States and partly Canada, but it was not for us, in a way. It was not for NATO as an alliance. That changed partly with a big discussion about 5G, where we realized that China controls critical infrastructure, which is important for us. And in the strategic concept, which is NATO's main political document, agreed, and then the new one agreed in Madrid 2 years ago. That's the first time we have language about China. The previous strategic document doesn't mention China with a single word. So we have come at least some way, and we are coordinating more what we do also related to China.
It also puts NATO in a decade or so confronting two major opponents. How close do you think, and maybe I'm not wording that right, but at this moment, what is the risk of nuclear escalation, given all of these increased alliances?
First of all, we don't see any imminent threat of any military attack and not of any use of nuclear weapons. At the same time, we are in a very different place than where we were just a few years ago. Because even during the Cold War, we were able, and especially the United States and the Soviet Union, and later the United States and Russia, were able to develop an arms control architecture where actually there were limits, there were reductions, and there were a minimum of transparency and predictability. I remember, for instance, the concern we had in Europe about the intermediate range missiles, the SS-20s, and then we in NATO deployed something called Pershing and cruise missiles. And then in '87, and I was a young man at that time, and I was out demonstrating against these missiles. But then suddenly in 1987, Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev signed the INF Treaty, not reducing, but banning all these missiles, zero. And that was a milestone in nuclear disarmament. Then we had the START and the New START, the strategic agreements, limiting the number of long-range nuclear weapons or warheads to 1,500. And we had other test ban treaty and other things. Now Russia has walked away from all of these agreements. This started by violating the INF Treaty, banning also intermediate range missiles. This is combined then with a much more, as I say, dangerous, reckless nuclear rhetoric from the Russian side, and then combined with the fact that now China is investing heavily and modernizing, and not only but increasing the number of nuclear weapons, many of them on long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles, able to reach the whole of NATO. As you mentioned, in not so many years, also in the next decade, we expect that NATO and the United States, for the first time in our history, will face not only one peer nuclear adversary or potential adversary, but two, Russia and China. And of course, and not only that, with many more missiles and many more weapons, but also without transparency. Because I think we must never underestimate that these agreements, they were important partly because they put limits, but perhaps as important was the fact that we had trust, transparency. I remember I visited one of the U.S. bases in Kings Bay, I think it was in Georgia, also on the Atlantic coast of the United States, where they had nuclear submarines, and there was a special kind of vehicle to transport the Russian inspectors. So they came and inspected the strategic submarines of the United States, as the United States went and inspected the strategic submarines of Russia. When I was Prime Minister in Norway, we had a lot of engagement, not on strategic weapons, but the handling of nuclear waste, and also some old nuclear submarines in something called the Andreev Bay on the Kola Peninsula. All of this, which actually created a lot of transparency and insight in what do they have and what do we have, is over, and that's that's serious.
But in the interest of transparency, are you asking the Allies to basically dust off their nuclear weapons and put them on standby and out of storage?
I think NATO has been and will continue to be a nuclear alliance, and we have effective and secure nuclear deterrent and nuclear weapons. The United States has, United Kingdom and France, but then we have a special arrangement with the United States where they have nuclear warheads, weapons based in Europe, and then we have European allies providing planes, bases, infrastructure. So together, this is what we call the nuclear sharing arrangements, or NATO's nuclear deterrent. This is something we had in place for many years, from decades. We are now in the process of modernizing that, but that is something that has been planned for a long time. It's not a response to any specific decision from the Russian side, partly because these nuclear missions or nuclear deterrent has been based on F-16s. Now allies are replacing the F-16s with F-35s, more modern planes, and the United States is also modernizing the weapons. But NATO, we are going to react in a calm and measured way. We're not going to, in a way, mirror exactly what Russia and China are doing, but we just have to be certain that we have a credible nuclear deterrent, and we will continue to have that.
Well, there's no doubt that in the last 2 years and 118 days, I think, since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the world has changed. NATO has clearly changed, as you outlined in your remarks. But, you know, in this country, inevitably, when you talk about NATO, someone points out Canada's failure to hit that 2% target GDP funding. And according to your tracking, NATO tracking, which I think just came out yesterday, Canada is at 1.37%, so still under. And I just wonder, do you think this issue is actually hurting Canada's reputation among the Allies?
Canada is a highly valued and highly respected NATO ally, because actually you are quite big. I mean, you have to remember that Canada is not a small ally, it's one of the biggest NATO allies, both when it comes to territory. You are Atlantic, polar, and Pacific nation. You have a strong army, big economy, and you also contribute to our shared security, to our collective defense. You have been an important part of our mission in Afghanistan. We are now together in Iraq with a training mission there. And you are present in Europe. You lead the battle. Canada leads one of the battle groups you have in the eastern part of the alliance, the one in Latvia. And that's a significant contribution by Canada to European defense, to NATO's collective defense. And Canadian planes and ships are regularly part of NATO naval and air, also air policing missions and naval operations. I say this because NATO's standing in, Canada's standing in NATO is strong. But at the same time, of course, we expect all allies to make good on the promise of investing 2%. That's no way to hide that. We agreed it, and actually in Vilnius at the last summit, we agreed to say that 2% is a minimum. And of course, the challenges you face in Canada are the same challenges they face in other NATO allied countries. That they have budgets, they are concerned about the fiscal balance, they want to spend money on health, education, and all the other things. And I am the first to understand that. But again, if we're not able to prevent war, if we're not able to preserve peace, then what we do on health and climate change and education, anyway, it will fail. So a precondition for success on all the other areas is that we preserve peace, and therefore we need to invest in security, and 2% is now a minimum.
Pardon? Oh my goodness, we've run out of time.
Oh. I know. Everybody
having so many more questions.
I think we were all fascinated anyway, so you asked all the biggies. So, but thank you.
I have so many questions about Ukraine. Oh well, another time.
We'll continue at another time, perhaps after October. But this is just the final part of our program, and it's one of my favorites. And if you don't mind just staying up here, especially Secretary General, we've got the NATO Association is an organization that's vital. It is constantly churned up again and again. Every 4 months, we have a group of new interns who help to make sure that the organization is taking a look at new ideas, new ways to communicate to Canadians, making sure that we're part of new conversations with different groups across the country, not just the traditional defense and security crews that we have in various cities and different provinces, but we're trying to get into cultural communities, people across all sorts of different disciplines. So our interns help us do that. And I'm pleased today to present our Trailblazer Award. Our internship has been going for 30 years. A couple of years ago, we decided that we should start recognizing one intern every year to help be that symbolic face of the internship. Because so many of our interns really do put in a lion's share of work at the NATO Association. And we couldn't do it without them. So first of all, just a round of applause to interns generally. And for one specific, I would like to ask Antalya Popatia to join me on stage. Antalya's been volunteering at the NATO Association since 2019. Come on right up. She started what she thought was a 4-month internship. It ended up to be never-ending. She's continually volunteering. She's put on a Women, Peace and Security program. She has helped as a program editor and continued with social media. And now she's a volunteer with the Youth Atlantic Treaty Association for Canada. So Antalya's really put in a tremendous amount here. It's gives me so much pleasure to be able to award her the Trailblazer Award. And I'd like to ask all of our interns, past and present, who are here today. We'll get a photo with Secretary General Stoltenberg and Antalya. This is your award.
Thank you. Congratulations.
And I'd like to get a photo with all of our interns. But I must say, as they're assembling here, don't they look like a fine bunch, eh? It's not just our interns who carry our message. Everyone in this room has that opportunity. When you're just out with friends, when you're talking with colleagues, the whole reason for being of NATO is you. NATO is here to protect everything we love, our favorite music, our favorite moments here in Canada. So I just put this upon your shoulders. This is burden sharing at the most basic level. So I would put that on every single person in this room, that we all have a responsibility to carry forth the NATO message and to make sure that all of our friends throughout Canada hear this. And if you do have the interest to help us here at the NATO Association, please do so. We always can use further volunteers. And just as we are nearing the end of our program, I would also like to recognize Lana Carleep, our Executive Director, who's put this whole event together. All right, as we are ending the formal program, I would like to ask everybody keep their seats while the Secretary General and his staff leave the room. Secretary General, thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, the Secretary General's had a very, very tight schedule today, flying in and flying out. One more round of applause for NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. An international relations rock star, if there ever was one, eh? From here on in, you're at your own, we can do whatever we want in the reception there. Drinks. Drinks would be in order. Food. Thank you so much for being our guests. I hope you'll stay involved. Thank you so much. Oh yes, and feel free to take lots of photos with our backdrop and post it on social media.
He's just gone for a 5 minutes break and then he'll be with you. Sure, sure.
Test, test, test. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Salut Liliane, c'est Jordan, ça va? Oui, d'abord, je vais juste m'assurer qu'il m'attend aussi. Parfait. Check-in, check-in, check-in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. C'est-tu beau, ça? Ouais? OK. Merci, Eric. Salut. T'as eu ça avec la... ben... It's not too late. Je voudrais derrière toi. Ben, ils sont faits fort 3 minutes.
it's through.
since you're all lined up, I probably don't need to call on you, right? So everybody who asks a question is kind of... yes, Secretary General.
Yeah. Thank you. Good afternoon. It's great to be back in Canada. It's great to be here, not least because Canada is such a highly valued NATO ally, which contributes in so many different ways to our collective defense, to our shared security, and especially now when we are preparing for the upcoming NATO summit in Washington next month, it's important to consult and to travel around and meet the leaders who are going to be at the summit, and therefore look forward also to have a dinner with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau later on today to also discuss the different issues that will be important at the NATO summit, and that is deterrence and defense, Ukraine, and also our Asia-Pacific partners. I think you heard the speech. I think the best thing now is for me to be available to answer some questions.
Secretary General, welcome back to Canada. Murray Brewster with CBC News. Canadian officials have been saying that they've been assuring you and pretty much anyone else who listened at NATO that they're working on a plan for 2%. Have you seen a plan, and are you satisfied with the explanations that you've been given?
What I've seen is that Canada has increased defense spending and that Canada is investing in new important capabilities for NATO, not least the F-35s, the fifth generation fighter aircraft, but also modernizing NORAD, which is important not only for Canada and the United States, but the whole of NATO. Then I expect that all allies will reach 2%. We have agreed 2% of GDP for defense, and I expect those allies who are not able to reach it by this year, by 2024, that they will put forward a plan for when they will be there, and I'm looking forward to have a plan from Canada.
One follow-up. President Putin met today in the North Korean capital. It looks like there is going to be increased defense cooperation. What should the alliance make of that, and what can the alliance potentially do?
When authoritarian powers like Russia, North Korea, Iran, China are aligning more and more, then it's even more important that countries like NATO allies stand together and protect freedom and democracy. So the most important answer is to strengthen NATO, is to strengthen the alliance between democratic free nations. Also actually to work with those countries who are not NATO allies, but which share our values and our close partners. And NATO will remain an alliance of North America and Europe, but it's extremely important that we, in light of the alignment between Russia, China, North Korea, are also working more closely with our close partners in the Asia-Pacific, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, Australia, and they will be present at the summit. I think the visit of President Putin to Pyongyang, to North Korea, just demonstrates how dependent Russia now is on their other authoritarian friends, China, Iran, North Korea. And North Korea has supplied Russia with enormous amounts of ammunition and military support to the war aggression against Ukraine.
Alex Bellingham with the Toronto Star. Just picking up on that, you talked about this increasing alignment of authoritarian regimes and the need to impose costs on China. Can you expand on that a bit and maybe articulate what kind of cost you'd like to see a country like Canada impose?
Well, it's too early for me to say exactly what kind of costs, but my message is that we need to start to assess that option. We need to start to consult on potential costs because it's not sustainable and viable that China continues to fuel the biggest security threat challenge for NATO allies, especially in Europe. By propping up the Russian war economy, by supplying the advanced technologies they are using to produce the weapons they use in the war against Ukraine, without to see that going on without having any consequences for China. I'm not able to tell you now exactly what those consequences will be, but I'm confident that if this behavior of China continues, there will and must be some consequences.
Just following up on Murray's question about the 2% plans that you'd like to see, that you expect to see. Do you expect to see that from Canada, a plan outlining how they'll get there before or by the Washington summit?
Well, I will sit down with the Prime Minister and also meet the Foreign Minister later today, and we will discuss many issues. I'm here in Canada now to discuss a wide range of issues. Also, all Canada's very important contributions to our collective defence, the Canadian-led battle group in Latvia, which we are now looking into how we can scale up. Canada's contributions to what we do in the High North, NORAD, maritime operations. So it's a wide agenda with many issues, but of course one of them is also defence spending, and then we also I also expect that we will address when and how Canada can present a plan for when to be at 2%.
Hi, Kyle Duggan from Politico. The defense minister has talked about the 2% target and how it's difficult to explain to people what it means. It's kind of an imperceptible spreadsheet target. So how would you explain to Canadians what the risk is of not meeting the target? We're projected to not meet it throughout the rest of the decade.
The best way to preserve peace is to have a strong defense force, is to have defense which is credible, meaning that there is no risk for misunderstanding, miscalculation in Moscow or in any other capital of a potential adversary, that NATO is not ready able to defend all NATO allies. Because as long as we have credible deterrence, as long as we have strong defense, we will succeed in the next 75 years with what we have been able to achieve over the past 75 years, and that to prevent any military attack against any NATO allied country. And of course, when we see China, Russia investing heavily in new military capabilities, including long-range weapons, advanced missile systems, then, and we also see that, that Russia in particular are willing to use military force against neighbors, not only Ukraine, but Georgia and elsewhere, then, and also we see China behaving more and more also aggressively against neighbors and threatening neighbors, then it is important that we invest in our defense, not to fight the war, but to prevent the war. And of course, I understand that in Canada, you are in a position where you have the Atlantic Ocean, the Arctic in the north, and then the Pacific Ocean, then a good friend and ally, United States in the south. But no nation is protected against threats in an age of global great power rivalry, in an age of ballistic missiles, strategic submarines, weaponization of the space, of cyber threats, of terrorist threats. So this is also an issue or a challenge for Canada, and the best way to ensure that we preserve peace is to stand together in NATO and invest as we have agreed, and we have agreed in NATO to invest at least 2%.
And are you going to raise this issue with the Prime Minister tonight, the 2% target?
I will discuss a wide range of issues during my meetings and yeah, my visit here to Canada. And I will also praise Canada for everything Canada does, because Canada really contributes to NATO in many, many different ways. But of course, one of the many issues we will address is the issue of spending, and NATO allies reduced defense spending after the Cold War, and NATO allies have now started to increase defense spending after the end of when you see tensions have gone up over the last years. And also Canada has increased defense spending significantly. I think the challenge was that back in 2014, when we made the pledge, Canada was at a very low level. So compared to some other allies, you have a longer way to go. But but also Canada has now moved in the right direction and added significantly to the Canadian defense budget.
Hi, Andréane Apablaza, Radio-Canada. About the 2%, can Canada stay part of NATO if it fails to provide a clear plan to reach the target?
Canada will stay as a NATO ally. Canada will be a staunch and highly valued NATO ally. And then, of course, I will work to ensure that all allies meet the 2% guideline. And I'm confident that Canada will do that.
Does it risk diplomatic isolation by not providing a clear plan?
That's not the way NATO works. We work together, we address common challenges together, and I'm confident that we'll find a way forward also on this issue.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all very much, and thank you, Secretary General.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Okay.